Hola, buen dia. It's me, Peppermint. And when I'm not on RuPaul's Drag Race or simply being New York City's sweetest diva, I'm tuned into the fabulously empowering Bayard Rustin Center for Social Justice Power Hour, coming to you every weeknight at 7 p.m. live from our good old friends at the BRCSJ Virtual HQ via their Facebook page. Tune in tonight.
Need in every community a group of angelic troublemakers.
Social justice, power hour, power hour, power hour. Social justice, power hour, power hour, power hour.
Good evening to our friends on the East Coast, good afternoon to our friends in the West, and good in-between time to our friends in those in-between spaces. Welcome, 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 my friends. Welcome to the Social Justice Power Hour. Welcome to the virtual headquarters of the Bayard Rustin Center for Social Justice. My name is Robert Martin Say Schreiber. I'm the chief activist here and your host for this evening, as I have been for over a year and 8 months now. Over 450 some odd shows, many of them very odd indeed. We've done this every single freaking weeknight since the pandemic started. We haven't missed a night, haven't missed a beat, and thank you all for joining us tonight. Those of you that have been with us before, and I'm sure there's a whole bunch of new folks coming out because I know our guest tonight, Veronica Chambers, is going to bring a whole bunch of new folks to our yard, friends and fam and readers and all sorts of people who have been inspired by her work and her writings and who she is in and of herself. So thank you all for being here. And I want to just share with you before we start the show, so to speak, what's coming up on the Power Hour. Because I said at the outset, we are here 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific every single night for you. Please be here with us. We are here for you. So to entice you back, some highlights of what's coming up on the show. And speaking of highlights, Cal Penn, y'all, you can't be serious. You can't be serious. So this is something that I've been sitting on for months. It was our first embargo here in the Power Hour. I wasn't allowed to talk about this until Cal came out. And now that Cal has come out to share with us who he is, who he loves, we can now come out and tell you that Cal's going to be on the Power Hour with us. So stay tuned, true believers. That's going to be an extraordinary evening. But coming up just tomorrow night, I'm really psyched about this. Walter Nagel, who is Bayard Rustin's beloved partner, is a good friend to our center. He's actually our board member emeritus here. We had a wonderful, wonderful experience where we brought Walter together with Senator Scott Wiener. And Senator Wiener is the senator who spearheaded the effort to get Bayard pardoned for his crimes, quote-unquote crimes, back in the 50s. So what a wonderful evening that was. And since we've had so many shows, this is a throwback to that show. We're also going to bring on Valerie Jarrett. And Valerie Jarrett's going to talk about that moment where she was integral in giving Walter the posthumous Medal of Freedom to Bayard Rustin. And that's the anniversary is coming up. November 20th was the anniversary. It was going to be the anniversary of Bayard Rustin receiving the Medal of Freedom from President Barack Obama. So tune in for that. And then Friday night, we have something super special. This whole Big Bird hullabaloo that's been going around the social medias. Who better to talk about it than Sunny Days author David Camp and Jim Henson biographer Brian J. Jones. They've never met, so we're going to bring them together virtually to have this really important conversation about a big yellow 7-foot bird. So that should be great. And then coming up further on the show, this book just came out and it is blown up. The Shattering Kevin Boyle is going to be with us. Samson McCormick, black queer comedian, controversial as all heck. Cannot wait to chop it up with him. Adam Gopnik, one of the finest minds of our generation. OG Radical, the real, always honored when he drops by the Power Hour. Bloody Crossroads 2020 and Arts Entertainment Resistance to our previous administration, He Who Shall Not Be Named. Danny Goldberg is going to be with us. Looking forward to that conversation. Wesley Stace was just here last week, did a benefit concert live and in person. Very safe, vaxxed and masked. It was a wonderful benefit. And for those of you that couldn't be with us live, we're going to show it to you here in the Power Hour so you can enjoy this incredible, the entire Late Style band was with him. And it was a benefit to help us find a new home. As many of you know, we lost our space during the pandemic, and it's hard to be a safe space without a space, y'all. So please tune in for this special concert. And then finally, we have every Tuesday night, as we've done since the start of the pandemic, we have our queer yoga. We invite you all to come and take a breath with us, both literally and figuratively, as our queer yoga master, Jasmani, brings us to virtual nirvana. So that's just some highlights, y'all, of what's coming up on the Power Hour. But speaking of coming up and speaking of Power Hours, here we go. Veronica Chambers is a prolific author of over 20 books. What? 20 books? Oh my gosh. Mayhaps best known for her critically acclaimed memoir, Mama's Girl, which has been, of course, adopted by hundreds, yes, I said hundreds of high schools and colleges throughout the country. Born in Panama, raised in Brooklyn, her work often reflects her Afro-Latina heritage, and she has co-authored the award-winning memoir, Yes, Chef, with Chef Marcus Samuelson. Oh, he is so handsome. And has collaborated on 4 New York Times bestsellers, including 32 Yolks with Chef Eric Repair, as well as serving as senior editor at the New York Times Magazine, Newsweek, and Glamour, among a whole bunch of other things. I can go through her bona fides all night, but let's get to it. Tonight we'll chop it up about her latest, Call and Response, the story of Black Lives Matter, a broad and powerful exploration of the history of Black Lives Matter told through photographs, quotes, and informative, inspirational text. Kirkus Reviews says, quote, readers will find stories they haven't heard before in this volume and will discover new inspiration from the familiar. Despite their subject's renown, they are presented with such strength that is inspiring rather than overwhelming. A resource to enrich the shelves of every home and library. And we're all about enriching homes and libraries here at the Bayard Rustin Center for Social Justice headquarters. So please join me in welcoming to our Social Justice Power Hour, Veronica Chambers. Veronica, thank you so much for being with us this evening.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
We're so happy to have you. Gosh, this book is phenomenal. I already feel like I'm at a loss because I want this to be 2 hours. I want to talk about this book, but there's so much more that you've done and that you've contributed to and that you've given to us as real gifts. So we have a lot to get to. So let's get right to it.
Let's do it.
What's amazing about this book, and I want to show it to folks, is that, you know, most books have this very, very long journey to publication. And this book smells and looks and feels and reads as though it was printed and written like this morning. And it's just amazing. So can we start there? Like, let's start the journey of this book. And then I want to talk about your journey, but let's talk about the journey of this book first. What was the very inspiration of it? Was there an epiphany one day with you and your co-author and, you know, the folks that were involved that said, we need to do this, we need to document this, and we need to do it in a different way that's been done or being done? And then how was it so incredibly fast-tracked to get it to us and have this gift to us that we're able to almost be a part of the movement as it's happening?
Well, thank you so much. And thank you for all the work you do with the center. Obviously, I think people like Bayard Rustin were such an inspiration to all of us and to this movement. And so this evening feels really special and like a moment of synergy because I think a lot of things, you know, last June, I was a mess like so many people. I could not pick myself up off the floor with the level, Breonna, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd. It's not that I'm a grown person, you know, raised in America. I knew that this was a factor of our lives, but it all hit really hard. And my daughter at the time was 13 years old. And honestly, I think I had focused a lot on the triumphs of our history as Black people, as Black Latinos, as, you know, first generation Americans. And I hadn't dove as much into things like the violence. I think, and so I had a lot of explaining to do very quickly, like, because the thing that I really wanted my daughter to understand was that this goes back centuries. It connects to things like the Black codes. It connects to Reconstruction. You know, the fact, I mean, you know this, I know so much of your audience knows this, but, you know, the whole incarceration nation goes back to you could make a Black man work for free by arresting him. You know what I mean? Like in the immediate post-slavery era. And so it becomes very lucrative to do that. And so I was doing a real fast go through from slavery to Reconstruction to lynching to police brutality. I mean, I'm just trying to educate and inform and give context, because I think that's a really important thing. I think context and history is everything when you're talking about a struggle. To know that this is something that generations have been dealing with and fighting for, and this last summer was for so many people their moment to step in the ring, but we've been in that ring for a long time. So in some ways, I wanted to make sure that she understood it was immediate, but also urge her to take the long view, because as you know, I love your t-shirt, Angelic Troublemaker. Those of us who have been making good trouble and come from a lineage of good trouble, it is generations. It didn't start last summer, and unfortunately, I don't think it'll end this summer or next summer or the summer after that. You know, I'm just back from COP26, my first time attending. And so I've got climate justice so much in my mind. And I was so moved by how activists there, especially the youth activists, connected the dots between the mechanisms of colonialism with the mechanism of climate destruction, you know, exploitation, extrapolation, you know, belittlement of people, valuing resources over people. All of that led us to the moment that we're in. So I'm talking a lot, but I guess what I'm saying is I think connecting the dots is everything. Because
first of all, thank you for talking a lot. As I said, I've done 450 of these shows, so people had enough of this fuzzy face. They want to hear from you. I'd be happy to go in the corner put baby in the corner the whole time. And,
no.
But you said something that sparked me at the outset. You said you wrote this for your 13-year-old daughter, and it's interesting because I felt, although they're you know, somewhat related. Adam Gopnik, who I mentioned before, is going to be on the show, and an old friend of the show, such a great mind, wrote 1,000 Small Sanities to his daughter.
Yeah.
And I felt like there was a connection with these two books, as though they were being written, and there's a care to them. There's a care to this book. And you talk about the violence, and you talk about the difficult things and the ugly things, and the parts of it that we don't want to have to not only acknowledge but embrace. But you do it with this tenderness that's really phenomenal. And I guess that came from knowing that you were in some respects doing this for your own daughter, and then for all our daughters, all our sons, all our non-binary children.
Exactly. I believe in us, and I love us, and I feel, you know, writing this book, I had to go back and watch the videos. I had to go back and read the books. There were days when it was so heavy. I mean, I had a deadline, so we decided to do it last August. I worked with the incredible team at Versify. Wesley Turner was my editor, but Margaret Ramo, who I'd worked with before, was an incredible editor. Kwame Alexander, I don't know if you've ever had him on.
We did.
Yeah, Kwame was the first, you know, editorial director of Versify. He actually came up with the title Call and Response. And And I love him for that. And I feel like everything Kwame does is a call and response. And so I had that in my heart too. So we started last August to have it come out this summer. My first deadlines are December and January. And I was just like, I'm not done. I don't know how to do it. I had read Cast by Isabel Wilkerson last summer, another book that sort of had me on the floor and in my feelings, not because I didn't know, but sometimes seeing all the evidence of oppression stacked up so eloquently will just break your heart all over again. So I had a whole version of the book where I was trying to be like a baby Isabel Wilkerson and Cast, and I had like hundreds of pages about history, and then I think, to me, writing books is almost like Legos. Like I think every book has a structure, even if it's non-structural, you know what I mean? Or even if it's anti-structure, that is a structure. And so what I really decided to do, and the way that I was able to sort of see a light through for the book was the first half of the book is about race, Black Lives Matter, social justice movements, how we got here. And then the second half of the book is really about what did people do with this information. And it starts with how champions lead. And we talk about athletes like Colin Kaepernick and Arthur Ashe and Naomi Osaka. And, we just go through the athletes, which I love doing. And, what I love is that I think Kwame and so many authors, and I think Versify has been really great about this. I'm very aware that not every kid is a reader. And I really believe that, or reads easily. And I really believe that we do a disservice to kids by saying some kids are into books and some aren't. I think there's a book for everybody. And so what I wanted to do and what I loved about starting with the athletes is I've had so many kids say, I read that chapter first. And there's a lot of pictures. And those are kids who don't always read. But, we talk about Tommy Smith and the 1968 Olympics. We talk about Maya Moore. And so I did that. And then we talked about music and the sound of protest. And I think, I'm interested in what you think about this because I thought about music, not only in regards to the anthems of protest, like We're Gonna Be All Right or Strange Fruit or any of these songs. But I also think one of the things I was really struck by this movement in particular, Black Lives Matter, is that I think there was an awareness with this generation of activists of how hard protest is on the body and the spirit. And I think that, I think the 60s and the movements that came after that broke a lot of people down in a lot of ways. And so I'm really mindful of how activists are taking care of themselves. I really wanted young people to know that you are not failing the movement. If you need a break, if you need a mental health break, if you need to step away, we need you for the long term. And when I was in Glasgow talking to the youth activists, I was so moved by people like Bruno Rodriguez and Liz Wathuti from Kenya. And, they kept saying, I'm so tired. And I was like, we need you for the long term. Step away from this, take some time off, listen to some music, fill your soul, tell us how we can support you. And don't break yourself in trying to change the world. And as someone who's been a lifetime activist, I'm interested in your thoughts about that.
Yeah, no, 100%. It's something we've talked about a lot on this show, very, very often, Ashley, that idea of self-care, and I'll be honest, even just a couple months ago, I kind of, would make fun of it, would disparage self-care. But it's absolutely essential, and especially since I'll be totally upfront. I've started therapy, and I think mental health cannot be a stigma, and we need to not only address these things, but carry them proudly and say we are going to move forward because we want to be healthy in mind, body, and spirit. And we do that by being activists, by being there on the streets, but also by taking that moment that we need to off the streets for ourselves, for our families, chosen or otherwise. So we're always ready to be, as they say, back in the beautiful struggle the next day. And that's what's great about this book. And I want to bring it back to the book,
Yes,
not
please.
just for you, but for our community or an audience.
Yeah.
There's everything from a playlist in here to all sorts. The whole thing is a guide, really. Whether you're amplifying names or history or what's the future, but also the fact that there are bits of it that are literally guides and saying this is how this is a safe protest. This is what you do when this happens. This is how you take care of yourself here. But the whole thing reads as that almost holistically. And I'm not surprised that Kwame was involved, because when he was here in the Power Hour, it was an extraordinary moment. And he is so full of positivity, but also care for understanding that we all do register information differently. We all read differently. And just because we read differently, as you said, right, that doesn't mean books aren't for us. We just have to find the right books that are for us.
Yes.
And what's amazing about this one is that it really seems to be for everyone. If you enjoy reading, there are deep dives you can do. If you enjoy research, there's so much you can find and then explore even further.
Yes.
But if you like, photographs and art and music, it's all there as well. So it's really just a beautiful, it's intersectionality in written form.
Yeah. I think I love that. And I appreciate you seeing that in the book, because we really tried. I mean, what's interesting, I'll tell you, like, sort of an interesting structural thing is that I'm sure that but I don't know if everyone in your audience knows that when you're at a protest, a photographer doesn't need your permission to take your picture. Being at a protest is a form of consent for photographs. And this book actually features over 100 photographs, but sadly the cover does not have photographs. And the reason that we chose not to do that is because we could not verify who were in all of these photographs. And we didn't know, is there somebody under 18 in this photograph who went to a protest out of curiosity, but may not want to be on the cover of a book about Black Lives Matter? We didn't know. Sometimes we loved a photograph and we could identify 2 people in the photograph, but we couldn't identify the other 10. Did somebody skip work and go to the protest? Is somebody on parole? There are all these different things. And so we made a really conscientious decision to use over 100 photographs in the book, but not to, as badly as we wanted to, we didn't go with a photograph on the cover, really out of respect to the protesters and not putting them in a position of being on a cover of something that they may not have signed up for. Photographs like this, I don't know if you can see if the light is, but I was so moved by this and this woman, but I don't know, it's just a question of what did people sign up for? So we tried to be really respectful of that. At the same time, so there are over 100 photographs in the book. I would say we probably went through 2,000 to choose that 100. I mean, we had meetings every week, sometimes 3 or 4 times a week, where we would go through Ferguson, we would go through LA, we would go through all these New York, all these different places, the Bay. And what was really striking to me, and I think this says something about books and about images in particular, is that there were some photographs that we all had that moment where you're just like, and I think that's the thing. It's, I think a lot about Adrienne Rich and that book, Dream of a Common Language. And I think, in this book, perhaps more than almost anything I've tried to write, I really wanted to find a common language where, despite our backgrounds, we can say, this moves us. We understand this. We see what's happening here. And so, I really, as we did the winnowing process through thousands of photographs, we kept coming back to the one where you're sitting in a room or a virtual room with 5, 10 people and you all go, wow. And so I hope that comes through too, that someone could just sit and go through the photographs and not even need our words to have a feeling or a understanding of what this movement is and how it connects to so many other movements.
And what's amazing also is that there's absolute, almost on every page, there's the idea that I often espouse here on the show and at the center, that our past informs our present and it inspires our future.
Yes.
And what's imperative about this book is it's not really about what happened, and it's not about what's happening, and it's not even about what will happen. It's about all three all at once, which is such a rarity.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I love history, and I think the New York Times, is such a great holder of history. I mean, one of my favorite photographs I can show is this photograph of Arthur Ashe, which was taken in 1968 when he became the first, oh, sorry, I'm moving in the opposite way. He became the first Black player to win the US Open. What was so striking to me about this photograph is that it was taken months after Dr. King was assassinated. And Arthur Ashe was heartbroken, and he didn't even want to play tennis anymore. It's like, why does it matter? And so I feel like you see this photograph, and it's part of a whole series that the Times photographers were following him around because he was an unknown and he was unexpected and he was, you know what I mean, underestimated. All these things that so many of us feel in our lives, right? Underestimated, unexpected, unsupported, and he goes on to win it, changes tennis forever. But then, of course, you know, even as he became increasingly ill with AIDS, he fought for the rights of Haitian Americans. In September 1992, he wore a T-shirt that said, "Haitians are locked out because they're Black." And he was arrested at the White House. It turns out he had chest pains. He was so sick, it turned out he was having a heart attack, but he was still on the ground protesting. And then you cut to Naomi Osaka at the US Open last summer. She's got Haitian American heritage and she's wearing the mask. And I just think, you know, Arthur Ashe did not imagine a Naomi Osaka, but he, you know, we protest, we do what we do, not only for the people that we love, but for the people that are coming that we don't even imagine are coming, but they're coming. And we've got to, like, you know, as my friend, I have a really good friend that people should follow on Twitter, Samini Samgupta. She's one of the lead climate reporters for the New York Times. And she always says, you know, the job is to be a good ancestor. When you're a grown-up, that's the job. And so I think I love this sports chapter, and I loved, like, for me, just starting with a blank page and saying, oh my gosh, Arthur Ashe having a heart attack outside the White House, being handcuffed and arrested, fighting for Haitian rights, and then Naomi Osaka fighting for Black Lives Matter. And I love connecting those dots and feeling that as much as there is to despair about, you know, history teaches us to bet on hope, you know?
Bet on hope. That's beautiful. But I also love what you said in the middle there, to be a good ancestor. That you know, I haven't heard that before, and I'm going to take that to heart. That's really something that I think we can all hold on to and understand, no matter which community we belong to, no matter how we represent, no matter what we do. You know, and again, it's the simple, easy things, like if you work in an office, making sure you speak up, you know, either for yourself or others that you see not being treated respectfully, or it's playing in a tennis match and not understanding how important or imperative that may be at that moment or in the future, even more so. Mm-hmm. And it must have been such an incredible journey for you to write this, to find this, to travel with all these other folks, both literally the ones who were working with you and figuratively all the ancestors that you were able to find and amplify, some of whom are very well known, and we know the names, Kaepernick and Ash and, so on and so forth. And then others who are not, who have been lost to history, that you were able to bring back and say, they're part of the movement too. What they did mattered. What they did informed and inspired. Who are some of those folks that you found that either had been forgotten or never before explored? Were there moments of that kind of epiphany, like, oh my gosh, here's someone who I am so thrilled to be able to give a platform to?
It's interesting. I feel like in this book, I think that there's probably more well-known people than not. Last summer I was working on, it was the 100th anniversary of women's right to vote. And that was like a moment where we really were able to put into the canon a lot of women of color activists who weren't deemed suffragists in the same way that, Susan B. Anthony and all these other women were. I think that was more of a moment of putting together. In some ways, this book has a lot of names because we start with the 3 young women, who really gave the movement a name: Alicia Garza, Patrisse Cullors, Opal Tometi. And we really start with talking about them being young women and how each in their own way, in their own communities, we're trying to make the world a better place. And I love that Alicia said that her first post, and I know you've probably talked about this on the show before, she called it a love letter. And, I think that is something powerful. Bell Hooks talks about that love is so much part of social justice, and it's a stronger fire than hate or frustration or anger. Love can keep you going for a long time if you can keep that in the canon and conversation. The Bell Hooks quote is, indeed, all the great movements for social justice in our society have strongly emphasized the love ethic. And I do love that as the movement grew, that Alicia actually had a gathering of activists and older activists as well. And she called the gathering, "Now that we've got love, what are we going to do with it?" As the movement started to grow, it's like, now that we've got love, what are we going to do with it? And I think that is very powerful as well. You know what I mean?
And I think that's something that is oft forgotten, if even not even known by the vast majority of folks. And I'm so glad you bring that to our community, because I know that is something that people think of Black Lives Matter as being steeped in violence and rage and absolutely very justified in those emotions. But there's that love really at the core of it, and so it's what Brother Cornel West says, that love is what justice is what love looks like in public. But I also think about, another Kwame Mbalia, who wrote edited the great book, Black Boy Joy, and we just had on Monday, Farah Jasmine Griffin,
Oh my God, I love her work so much.
Yeah, we talked about how what she was doing could have easily been steeped in rage. Instead, she found the way to find the love and the celebration in the art and literature, after losing her father at such a young age. So it's wonderful to see us coming not out of anything. There's no coming out, but moving into what hopefully is a new normal.
Yes.
And there's rage and there's outrage in equal measure, but there has to be love at the core of it. And I love that you've raised that up.
Yeah. I mean, to me, it just felt really important and strong for all of it. I think one of the things that I was struck by is there's a woman named Leah Daughtry who's been very involved in the Democratic Party. Her father, Herbert Daughtry, was an activist and very on the streets activist. And, she was the first person who talked to me, and I talk about in the book, about how every movement needs inside people and outside people. You know, her father was on the streets and a close advisor to Jesse Jackson. And, you know, she was actually born the year of the March on Washington. And her mother was due, and her father was asked by King and Jesse Jackson to go on to the March on Washington. And her mother was like, if you're not here when this child is born, you're going to be in trouble. And so, you know, he was the guy who was always in the street, you know, always the Black rights activist. And, but she went to Dartmouth. She ended up working in the White House. She was an inside person. And her father was like, we need everybody. And I think that's something also for kids to think about, is that we need people agitating from all angles, and get in where you fit in. It's not a bad thing to have someone who is in the streets and protesting and marching and organizing, but we also need people to understand all the systems at play and to use their talents wherever applicable. And so, so I wanted to write a little bit about that too, because I thought it was something that I hadn't read a lot about when I was a kid.
And what's really important about that is, again, we touched on this before, the idea that many of us don't recognize our own talents and how they really can be of great service. You know, we say, oh, this person's doing this amazing work, and I can only do this. But that only doing this, whatever you may be doing, you have no idea the impact it may have on others, whether at present or in the future.
Completely. I mean, I was thinking about this the other day. I mean, when I was in high school, I was, you know, poor. I was homeless at certain points. And I can really connect the dots to my getting from my situation to college to maybe 5 people who took some time. You know, a college counselor who was a high school guidance counselor who was like, we need to get into this. You know, somebody else at the college who made an effort when my scholarship money didn't come through. You know, an officer of the college who like found a way, made a way out of no way. A professor of mine that I'm still so close to, Arthur Hillman, when I was really disenfranchised and, you know, kids were using the N-word as part of their free speech, and I felt really attacked. His wife is Louise Hillman, Asian American, and he was like, you know, she's been through a lot of this stuff. Come sleep at our house. And I had nowhere to go, and I ended up spending so many vacations with them. I mean, but 5 people who said, I can do something. And, you know, I think that I always talk about this. I mean, I don't talk about this, but I think about this. I gave my first scholarship to my college before I bought my first house. And because I just had to do something to connect to a student who might be in a circumstance like mine. And so I just feel like, you know, there's a saying that we overestimate what we can do in a short term and underestimate what we can do over the long term. You know what I mean? Like, I always think I'm going to clean all of my house on a Saturday. And I don't think if I do a little on Monday and a little on Tuesday, I never do. But I think in the same way, I think we overestimate what it takes to make a difference. And we underestimate our interactions with each other. And, you know, even the kindness of, I mean, first of all, I think you doing this every weeknight, extraordinary. But, you know, I'll be completely honest. I've been working so hard and I am so tired, and I'll be working, you know, till 10 o'clock tonight and I started at 5 o'clock this morning, and I went out right before we got on the call, and I just took a walk around the block to clear my head. And I was like, you know, I have a coach who always says to me, you know, the pressure is a privilege. If you have a platform, if you can use your voice, it's a privilege. So I was like, let me just take a walk, take a deep breath. It's going to be a long, long day. But, you know, you got on the call and you were really warm before the cameras were even rolling, that makes a difference in someone's life. You know what I mean? The way someone sends an email, it's like, I just think there's not a lot we can control. We can control a lot of things, but I think that part of the way that we make the changes that we want to do is we show some kindness and some warmth, however we can, to whoever we can, and we make each other strong, because we need each other. We need each other to be soldiers. We need each other to be forward thinkers and to hold each other up. You know, it's the old Gwendolyn Brooks, we are each other's harvest, we are each other's business, we are each other's bond. I think that starts on a day-to-day basis. And so I really believe in that. And I'm hopeful. I feel like the book for me was a big part of hoping that kids could find some small piece of themselves in it and feel something beyond this is about racism, this is about brutality, this is about the fear I feel because I'm walking around in this skin or this gender and I'm vulnerable. I wanted them to feel held up and to know that they come from a long and powerful lineage, you know.
I love that, but I really want to spotlight what you said in the middle there about this idea of everyday kindness, because I'm such a strong believer in that. It's something that my parents taught me, you know, when I was a kid, and that my wife teaches me now, you know, and being on that journey together with people you love and who love you. But, you know, walking into a store and saying hello to people and asking how they are, and not just, you know, in a dismissive, perfunctory way, but really listening and making eye contact and seeing other people's struggles and being there. And if you can't help per se, to at least empathize and at least make them feel acknowledged in that moment, I think it's imperative, and I think it makes an absolute difference. And I'm so glad that you said that to our community tonight, because I think that people need to hear that. So I think that will give them the resolve to do it and the understanding of how important it is. And those that are doing it, which I'm sure are most who are watching, because they're good folks watching, will feel that much more empowered and will feel recognized for doing it. And I think that's important too, to not only be the person that does it, but to recognize others for the doing of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I want to talk to you about, and this kind of ties into it, this idea of collaboration, which I see as an absolute thread through all of your work, whether you're working with these chefs or you're working with your colleagues at the Times, or all of these folks that you brought along this journey for this book. Is that something that was always a natural function of who you are, a component of your personality, or is that something that you said, okay, now I have, and you mentioned before, have a platform, or I have an ability to amplify, so let me make sure that I bring others along and also allow them to bring me along as well, and find that delicate balance between what I want to say, what others want to say, and how we can best say it together so the community hears it in the best way possible.
That's a good question. I think collaboration is something that I really only came into over the last 10 years, I think. I mean, I worked in magazines, which is very collaborative, and I taught and I wrote for TV, and that all of that. So I had experiences of working on projects together, but I think the last 10 years, I think I really tried to tap into collaboration as a superpower, partly because like you said, I started writing books with other people. And one of the questions that I would always ask is, what is the story you were meant to tell? And I think that is one of the hardest questions for people to answer. And we often think, oh, someone's famous or they're successful, and they know. And I don't think they always know, you know, like I think you mentioned Eric Repair, who I think is just such an he's an extraordinary chef, but he is an extraordinary human being. And when I listened to his story, I really felt like his was a story about transformative masculinity. You know, he was someone who, in the book, so I'm not telling stories out of school, who had a series of abusive stepfathers, teachers, then mentors, then bosses. And by the time he was in his 20s, he was a very angry young man. And he really builds this path to where he's like, I'm actually not happy emulating the people that raised me. And in some ways, like, I think when we looked at his story, you know, there would be an abusive stepfather, and then there would be a great teacher. There'd be an abusive mentor, but then there was a really caring mentor. There was like an abusive boss, but there was somebody. And so it was really about the choices he made, about looking at his history and trying to turn down the volume on one type of person and raise the volume on the other sort of person. And so and I think, I don't know, I'm very interested in how masculinity is going to transform. Like, I think we talk a lot about women and women's safety and all of that, non-binary people. I think that's very important. I think men in this society need a movement, and they need support, and they need guidance, and I really hope that someday Eric's book will not just be taught or read as a book about a great chef and a food journey, but to me, the book I was really trying to write, and partly, you know, he had a son who was the same age that he was when his father passed away. So I felt that in the writing too. I thought, here is someone who was able to like change his life 365 degrees by going back through his history and thinking through the choices and examples that were offered to him, and in a calculated way going, I'm going to choose a different kind of manhood. I'm going to emulate a different kind of masculinity. I'm going to do this differently. And I'm going to, you know, back to the love question, I'm going to lead with love and integrity. And I'm going to find a tenderness in myself that that is going to help me be the person I want to be. I think that insight really comes from a collaboration between the two of us, and a lot of him opening up and me listening and then reflecting back what I heard. You know,
now I want to have Eric on the show. I want to have this conversation with him. We're gonna have to have that.
I think he's amazing. He's amazing. You know, his Le Bernardin, his restaurant is one of the most, you know, successful restaurants in the world. It's, I think, the only restaurant in New York to keep 4 stars for over 20 years. He's never expanded the restaurant because he says a third of his life is for his spiritual evolution, a third of his life is for his family and his friends, and a third of his life is for the passion that he has for food. And he's like, if I expand it, I will lose the balance. I know what the balance is. So, and, you know, his best friend was Anthony Bourdain, and Anthony used to always joke, you should open Le Bernardin fish and chip shops. You should have frozen Le Bernardin food. And he was like, you know, it should be in every supermarket. And he has never done it because he is so clear about what his path is. And he's the person who really got me into meditation. He, you know, running a 4-star, 3 Michelin star restaurant. And he's like, let's go upstairs and I'll teach you how to meditate. But that's who he is. And and I'm so inspired by his life and his energy and his spirit. And I just, I learned so much from that. So to me, that's kind of partly how collaboration has worked. And I always get something from it. I learn a lot, you know.
And that's the perfect distillation of what it should be, right? But it's interesting to me that it calls back to what you said at the outset when you were talking about, you literally said there were 5 people in your education life, in your younger self's life that made a difference, that were there for you. And all at once, that's devastating to think there were only 5. But by the same token, you think those 5 were so incredibly imperative. And it goes back to what we said in the middle. So we're like, bring everything together, right? Mm-hmm. That we don't know what difference we make. Those 5 folks didn't know how much of an impact they were going to have on you. and didn't know that they would bring you to this journey that would produce something like this, right? So we never know those moments of kindness when we invite a student to stay after school just to have a conversation, when we invite a friend to call and say, hey, I'm here if you need me, when we give guidance that is essentially, should be perfunctory, but it's a thing that most of us don't consider and don't take the time to really put our full energy into. And you see through your story and then through Sheriff Repair's story of what this can mean, both the negative and the positive impact.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I know that we're coming up on time. Can I talk about winning a little bit?
Yeah, of course, please. Yes.
So this book has been interesting to me because I think at the end of last summer, we felt like there were so many wins of the movement, right? And just do this again. and yet when I looked back, and I think we talk about this in the paper we've written about in the New York Times, so many corporations backpedaled on their promises. All the places that were like highlighting Black makers and all that kind of stuff have like toned that down and moved on to something else. But, I wrote a book that came out last summer that I loved about Shirley Chisholm. And if anybody has not seen the documentary Chisholm 72, we're coming up on the 50th anniversary of her historic run for the presidency. And, she got more votes than was expected. She was the first Black woman elected to Congress. She first woman to make a credible race for the White House, walked into that convention with delegates in power that nobody expected for her. And what I wrote about in the Shirley Chisholm book is I said, not every race is a race we're meant to win. Some races are relays, and all we need to do is run as far as we can. And I think that's a really important thing to emphasize in a culture that really likes to talk about winning and stars and, people who are on top and people have X many followers. I mean, I think that I can't tell you how many times I've been on Instagram and I've seen something reposted from someone that might have 200 followers, but it was so profound. It moved me and I bookmarked it or I wrote it in my journal. Like, I think the thing is that we don't think about relays enough. We don't think about our connection and the fact that, Barack Obama talks about Shirley Chisholm being passing a baton through time to him of what was possible. I think that, Bayard Rustin, we didn't even talk about how queer identified this movement is, queer-led, queer identified this Black Lives Matter movement is, but clearly, they're the icons of the modern civil rights movement who lived a more diverse identity, who were not put forward in that era of Martin Luther King to be the face of the movement. That changed in this movement. Disability rights. And so in terms of who we think of as a leader and what bodies we think we go for as leaders, I just think that idea that you carry the ball as well and as far as you can, it's important. It's what has always moved things. I see in the back of your bookshelf, I spotted it right away, a moment, not a movement. A movement is the relay. It's how far we carry it and how we hand it off. It's both things. Because if we just carry it and we're just the thing and it's just about us and we don't hand it off and set it up for the next person to go the next length, then it's not actually a movement, right?
This conversation has been so simpatico. You led me into that was my last question for you, is how do we, literally I was going to ask you, how do we push past this moment and make it into a movement? And you leapfrogged me. Well done. Well played, my friend. Please tell people, you were just talking about the book, but please I love the title of your Shirley Chisholm book. So please tell people the title of it.
Oh yeah. The book is called Shirley Chisholm is a Verb, which
Just
is
wait. I just want to have a moment to,
yeah.
to let that seep in. Shirley Chisholm is a verb. I think that's what a great title and how perfect.
It was something I heard Shola Lynch, who's a documentary filmmaker who made a film about Shirley, say. But it's about Shirley. It's about the relay race of her life. Um, and she was such an extraordinary idol for me growing up in Brooklyn. But I also something that I tell because it's for a book for younger kids, and I always say, language is so simple in some ways. I mean, you taught middle school. When you're reading a story, a character is defined by their verbs. So if you use active verbs, if you say, Robert stretches, Robert connects, Robert leads, then that is one kind of story. If you say, Robert was tired, Robert was hungry, Robert was, whatever. If we make it passive, then the verbs don't do what they need to. So part of what I tell kids is, one way to shape your life is to try to choose what are the verbs that you want to exemplify you and to try to live those verbs, really as much as you can. And, I think that, the verb I think a lot about is create, connect, and it's not a verb, but it's adverb, gracefully. Like, I think it's really important to think not just about what you do, but how you do it. You can achieve so many things in like really shoddy ways that don't help people. So I want to achieve what I'm going for gracefully because I want the process to reflect the intention of the work, so.
And what you just said about finding that verb, I think that is absolutely befitting of adults as much as young folks, if not even more so. So I think young folks understand that almost intrinsically, because when you're young, you have that, you're putting forth that energy all the time. I think it's us as we grow older that we forget that we become more passive and we have to be more active. So I think that that's even better advice for as you grow and as you evolve, hopefully, that you have to keep being a verb. You have to keep finding that verb. So I'll put that challenge out to our older community folks as well. And I think that that's a great way because I have been so engaged in our conversation. I forgot to say to folks, gosh, in our comment section right now, one of our wonderful Princeton University fellows is giving you a link to buy this book. And it's to bookshop.org, and bookshop.org we love because they give back to independent bookstores as well as the authors themselves. And all of the authors who have been on the Power Hour are there as well. So there's a wonderful array of social justice books. But I want to make this crystal to our community, to our viewers tonight. This book is a young adult book, but it is so much more than that. And it really, you have achieved something that's rare. Because there are many young adult books that are so successful, but they are very specific and they deal with youth and how to engage youth. This book does that, but and maybe it's just my maturity level. When I was reading it and enjoying it and looking at it, and as you said, there are pictures and playlists and all this other ephemera in it, I was totally engaged. There was a moment where I'm like, oh, I feel I'm being spoken down to, or I feel like this is not written on my level. It's all about call and response, as you said. Kwame brought that to you, and then you brought that to the book, and that's what it is. This book, absolutely, you feel that when you're reading it, it's a conversation.
I wanted it to feel that way, so I'm glad it came across.
So I cannot thank you enough. There's so much more that I wanted to talk with you about, and hopefully maybe you'll come back at some point, because you'll write a book next week, and then we'll have to talk about that one. It's amazing what you produce. And all of it, such high quality, and I don't mean quality as it's meaningful. That's the kind of quality I'm talking about. And you've given us a real gift here, because this book is not only about what happened, but again, and I said this before, but I want to really just amplify it. It's about what's happening, But most importantly, for me, I think, and for our community, it's about what's going to happen. And you just gave voice to this about, we have to think about this moment as becoming a movement, or making sure it stays a movement and doesn't get stuck in a moment. And as you said, a lot of people are falling off, and rightfully so, right? I mean, it's been a difficult time for so many of us. So we want to take a rest. We want to say, okay, I did my part, I'm done. But we're not done.
Yeah.
We're not done because everything about this last year and a half, 2 years, 4 years has shown us that we need to move forward together. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I was so happy to meet you and to be part of this community. So
When we're happy to
I'll
have
be
you.
watching.
You're always welcome. Be well. Best to you, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
So everybody, that is Veronica Chambers. This is the book again, Call and Response, the story of Black Lives Matter. There it is. Look. Go buy a copy. Buy a copy for yourself. Buy a copy for a friend. Buy a copy for an enemy. You'll become a friend. And this is important, and I always say this, make sure that your local library has a copy of this book. Because although we want people to buy the book and support Veronica and all her co-authors and co-conspirators in making this book possible, there are lots of folks who can't afford to buy every book. And our local libraries are the conduits for them being exposed to these important, impactful, and inspirational ideas. So you call your local library, do it on a rotary phone, and you say, hey, do you have a copy of Black Lives Matter, Call and Response, the story of Black Lives Matter? And if they say no, you say, as a patron, I implore you to get a few copies on your shelves. Thank you so much for being with us tonight, sharing virtual communion here again in the Power Hour. As I said at the outset, we are here 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific, every single freaking weeknight. So please come back and be with us. We are here for you. So until soon, my friends, much love and respect. Be good to each other. Be good to your families, chosen or otherwise. And most especially, something we talked about tonight even, be good to yourselves. You need it, and we need you here with us.
We need in every community a group of angelic troublemakers.